Hello everybody and welcome to C2 Part 1, Master Controller Setup. We're going to set up our master controller using the Master Controller Device Manager element of the Compass Control software suite. So as a reminder from C1, the Compass Control software suite is free to download as soon as you gain your C1 certification, and it contains 5 different software elements. Once you install the Compass Control software suite, you should see those items on your desktop unless you've moved them anywhere else. And as a reminder, Compass Navigator, as we see enlarged on the far left, is where you program your system. We showed you how to program it using the modular methods in C1, and we show you how to program your system using the custom GUI building methods in C3. You could set up your master controller, as we see the second cluster of icons there, using the Device Manager software. Now, Compass Navigator Suite contains 5 software elements. There's actually an additional one here. There's the 6th, because we're going to show you during this video how to configure an MC1000 using the Master Controller Device Manager. But then we'll also give you a brief tutorial on the KD-HDLite Device Manager software in case you are using your KD-HD 4x4, 6x6, or 8x8 light as your master controller. We'll show you a quick guide on how to use that. And then the remaining 3 elements of the Compass Control software suite are the IR, RS-232, and TCP/IP managers. Now we're going to use the IR manager in C2 Part 2 to learn and edit IR commands. We'll use the RS-232 manager in C2 Part 3 to create or edit RS-232 commands, and TCP/IP manager in C2 Part 4, where we, of course, create or edit TCP/IP commands, and those will all be one-way command sets, not bidirectional. So as a reminder of the hardware that we are working with, we're going to be using our KD-MC1000 master controller. And the way that we load and set up the master controller, loading the new firmware and setting the IP settings and all of the desired items like that, is using the master controller device manager. We'll connect a USB-A to USB micro cable. It's included in the box. It's a standard connector type, non-proprietary. And with that connection made, after the drivers are installed, after your initial connection, you should be able to proceed. So we're going to skip now into the Master Controller Device Manager. I have my USB cable connected. And what we see here, download, setup, and support. Out of the box, the first thing you want to do is just make sure you have the latest firmware on your MC1000. So we connect, and it told us here in the status section that it was rebooting. The reason it reboots is because it's actually putting itself into bootloader mode, which is the mode in which it's ready to accept a new firmware file. And when I continue here, I see that my current device has version 4.17, and the latest firmware is also version 4.17. This selection box here allows me to pull the latest firmware from the Key Digital Cloud. However, if I'd like to pull something from a folder that is a saved file, if I don't have internet on site, this kind of thing, then I just deselect that and I would press open to save or to choose the file that is saved in my PC. So I press next, and it's going to give me the percentage. And during this time, you should also see the face of your MC1000. See all of the lights of your LED indicators on the face there that say 1 through 6. It should be going from left to right and back from right to left again, letting you know that it is updating that firmware block by block. Very good. My firmware is now complete. And the device, you should hear the tone of the USB cable being disconnected because the device actually resets itself, so it's no longer in that bootloader mode. And you're able to complete the software download. So you could close out of both of the softwares. And it's just something I typically have the habit of doing, that I close out of the software, but then actually open it back up again when I'm ready to enter my setup. So in the setup is where I'm able to configure my IP settings. I'm currently connected via USB, but note that you can also connect, of course, via IP after you do that initial setup via USB. So it tells me that I am running that 4.17 firmware version. I press next and I get to see my IP settings. Now the host IP, this is the IP address of the MC1000 unit. Okay, so if I wanted to whatever I desire my MC1000 to be configured as will be the host IP. Now also extremely important is the router IP address. The router IP address is the router that the iOS devices will communicate into the MC1000 via, also known as the default gateway. Our default IP address is port 23, but that is totally flexible, so you can change that. And in fact, what you're looking at here is not a sequence of default IP addresses. The default IP address is actually 192.168.0.239 for the host, and router IP 192.168.0.1. And the reason my unit didn't come in with the defaults is because I did a parallel firmware load. So let's pretend that I was ready to, I wanted to change the IP address and the router IP address or the default gateway to these settings here. I go ahead and I press the apply. And then after applying those settings, I'm able to receive a message from the software. It just takes a few seconds that it is now connected. Now, the rest of the tabs here actually are remnants of settings that were available when using the MC2500, the first generation master controller, where we were able to configure voltage levels. The MC1000 has a fixed 5-volt level for IR and RS-232, as well as triggering. However, the one thing that is that you are able to configure in the MC1000 is if you'd like a port to be configured as a sensor. And if so, what type of sensor? Now, it's kind of a tricky thing here, but kind of a trick wording. But in the drop down here where you have port mode, that means it is not a sensor. Port mode is actually standard executing of commands or bidirectional RS-232, so executing and receiving RS-232 communication. But then additionally, it can be set up as a sensor as we are in here, and we could be sensing video voltage, so voltage off of an analog video connector, for example, audio voltage off an analog audio, a digital audio connector, which is typically 1 volt peak to peak for PCM coaxial, where video is 2 volt peak to peak, voltage off of a trigger, or auto for video and audio, which will do an auto scan. And then when we choose the voltage level we want it to be at, the threshold is 0.1 at the low end to plus 3.3. And you'd be able to configure that as you wish in any increment of 0.1 volt. Setup for the MC, our master controller device manager software, is simply the phone number to call and email address if you wish to reach out to us. And of course, we make you say thank you. Okay, so now that I have set the IP address of my master controller, I'm going to just do a quick test to confirm that all the settings have applied. I'm going to go to setup. I'm connected successfully, except for now I'm going to set up, I'm going to enter via USB, via IP instead of USB. I enter the IP address of my master controller and I press connect, and it tells me right off the bat that I'm connected successfully. If it doesn't happen that fast, then you know you have an issue, and you go back in via USB, you check a few things out. Of course, another test would be to open your command prompt, and you could ping that IP address, and you should get the response from the unit. The device manager that allows you to configure your Digital IQ series matrix. If you recall, the Digital IQ series is a series of video matrix switchers, 4x4, 6x6, and 8x8. Model numbers KD-HD 4x4 6x6 light, and 8x8 light. The 4x4 is a 16, the 6x6 is a 26, and the 8x8 is a 32-port master controller with built-in compass control. And in fact, there are actually 17, 27, and 33 ports when you consider that the RS-232 port becomes available without the need for an external control system. And we call those the bonus ports, as you may remember from your C1 exam. And it's done similar or identical with a USB cable. However, the difference is the USB cable is a USB to USB A to A type cable. It is not a USB A to micro cable. Now that cable is included in the packaging for your for your HD 4x4 light, HD 6x6 light, or HD 8x8 light. And the software we're going to use is the HDLite Device Manager software. It is the same software whether you're using a 4x4, 6x6, or 8x8. So I've connected my USB, I open the software, and it tells me that it was able to install the device driver software successfully. I go to download in order to get the latest firmware, and it does the exact same thing, which is it's going to put it into bootloader mode. And as a note for you, if you're working with an HDLite, now that it's in bootloader mode, you should see that every single blue light on the face of the unit is illuminated. That's the indicator that it is in bootloader mode. Sometimes people do weird things and get it stuck. If it's in bootloader mode, there are ways to, of course, get it out of that. You'll want to contact Key Digital Technical Support. So here we are, unlike my MC1000, this HDLite matrix that I'm working with has a very old firmware version. And there's a new version available according to the Key Digital Cloud. It's version 1.22. So we press next to begin that firmware download sequence. Okay, so our firmware is successful now for the HDLite. And just as before, I'm going to close out of the Device Manager software completely. So I can reopen it here from my desktop, because after that firmware load, it really should, it takes a moment to reload the drivers. And in fact, you'll even see that on the face of the HDLite, it actually takes a few seconds to boot up, and you'll see the blue lights come back incrementally one at a time until it's 100% and then returns to normal blue light status, which is just one output per input being shown. Now we could enter setup. We show that it is successfully connected, and we have our firmware version that is the latest and the greatest. Our host IP is set to the default. If I'd like to change those settings for the host IP and the router IP, aka the default gateway, we go ahead and do so, and we